Biology review on the chemical basis of life. The first topic that we're going to cover is water. When we think about life, life depends upon water. Life would not be able to exist without it. So what makes water such a special compound? This has to do with its chemical structure and therefore chemical properties. Water, H2O, is made up of these two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. Oxygen is very much electronegative, especially compared to each of these hydrogen atoms. Therefore, because it has this electronegativity, it is going to have a greater pull on the electrons that it shares with hydrogen in this covalent bond. Because the electrons are not shared equally between these two atoms of the covalent bond, we call this a polar covalent bond. So this sets up an area around the oxygen atom that has a partial negative charge because the electrons are going to favor the oxygen atom compared to the hydrogen atom. And you can see that the hydrogen atom is further away than from the electrons. So on the hydrogen end, it sets up a partial positive charge. So we then say that water is a polar compound because it has a slight negative and slight positive side. Now, because of this polarity and because it has hydrogen atoms that have a partial positive charge, water can form hydrogen bonds between other water molecules. The negative end of oxygen is going to attract the positive end of the hydrogen of another water molecule, thus forming this hydrogen bond, which is an intermolecular force. So those are the chemical properties that water has. So what are some of these unique characteristics of water? Well, because of its polarity, it is what we call a universal solvent. In a solution, water can dissolve most compounds that are either polar or ionic. Water cannot dissolve nonpolar compounds because they lack those chemical charges that water needs to be able to dissolve or pull apart a compound. Water is unique because in its solid form, ice is going to float. This is going to allow for a lot of special properties of water, but what you'll notice is that when water molecules start to slow down, so once they go from a higher energy state with more energy to a lower energy state, they're going to come together, but then they're going to stop moving around so quickly. And they're going to actually form lots of hydrogen bonds with other water molecules and form a lattice. So around 4 degrees Celsius, this lattice structure will start to form. And in between each of these water molecules, you can see in ice that it has lots of opportunity for air to become trapped. Another unique characteristic is, again, because of the hydrogen bonding, water is very stable and it has a high heat capacity, meaning that it's going to take a lot of thermal energy to be put in to water to break the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules, to get them moving faster and to warm up the temperature of water. So water can resist temperature change much more than many other compounds. Water has the ability to stick to other water molecules and form this surface tension. Again, this is due to the hydrogen bonding of water molecules. And when water sticks to water, we call that cohesion, water sticking to itself. Water can also stick to other substances, and for instance, if there's a narrow tube, it can climb that narrow tube with capillary action. Water, because it has those opposite charges, it can then cling to other charges in other molecules. So when water is attracted to something else besides water, we call that adhesion. So those are the properties that water has. So how are these unique properties of water there to help support life? Why does life depend upon water? Well, one example is with capillary action. Trees and other plants are going to need water to help carry things, ions, from their root system up to all tissues of the tree. And it does so with capillary action. Water sticking to itself and these narrow tubes, it can climb up a plant's xylem so that cells can have adequate water, but that they can also bring with them those desired nutrients. Because ice floats, this is going to allow for a liquid habitat. If ice sunk to the bottom, then that would not be conducive for a lot of aquatic life because they would freeze during the winter. So because ice floats, it forms a protective coat at top, leading to a continuation of the liquid habitat, but also a stable habitat. Water is incredibly important in metabolism. Metabolism is going to utilize water for chemical reactions such as dehydration synthesis, as well as the opposite of hydrolysis to break down substances that you would eat. And then the last one that I have here is temperature. Remember, because of the high heat capacity, water allows for stable temperatures. So within you, it allows for you to help maintain your temperature, but also on a climate end, areas that are near water are going to have a more stable temperature. So another really important chemical is carbon. So why is carbon important to life? If I look here, carbon is really important because of these 4 electrons that it has in its outer orbital. These 4 electrons are going to allow for the carbon atom to form 4 covalent bonds with many other elements. Since they don't want to give up their electrons to form ionic bonds, covalent bonds are important for life because they are the strongest type of bond in living things. Ionic bonds, where there is a transfer of electrons, are going to be more easily pulled apart in water solutions. Covalent bonds, on the other hand, are much more stable and therefore are going to be much more useful for living things with lots of water within our systems. Due to these 4 covalent bonds, carbon can also form a wide variety of different types of chemical structures. It can form these lattices, it can form rings, it can form long branches, it can form chains. So it's like a very useful Lego piece that you can use in a lot of different scenarios to build lots of different structures. How do we build those structures out of carbon atoms? Well, carbon atoms are going to be used to make monomers. Monomers are key in living things because these are those small building blocks at which we need to form polymers, those larger organic structures that make up life. How does this happen? Well, there's a process of dehydration synthesis, which is going to link together 2 monomers. The term dehydration, you can see that when that bond forms, there is a water molecule that will come out of this reaction. So building up of polymers requires a dehydration synthesis reaction. The opposite of this is a hydrolysis reaction. Think hydro, water, and lysis, to break. So hydrolysis reactions will break polymers. So at the end of this diagram, you'll see that you are going to, well, here you're forming your polymer, but now you take this water molecule and you're going to use it to break this covalent bond in a hydrolysis reaction, separating the 2 monomers once again. So for those monomers, what kind of monomers are going to be used in life? So there are 4 main categories of monomers because there are 4 main polymers that make up life. Nucleic acids are made up of these monomers called nucleotides. Carbohydrates are made out of monosaccharides. Lipids have two, glycerol and fatty acids, and proteins have amino acids. So a nucleic acid would be RNA, DNA, as well as ATP. So for a nucleic acid and the nucleotide structure, they are made of three basic parts. You have this 5-carbon sugar, you have a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. So all nucleic acids are made of these nucleotides. The function of nucleic acids is primarily to store genetic information, so especially DNA and the disposable copy of RNA. But ATP is also a nucleic acid, and that's going to be used to store cell energy. Your cells cannot do any work without this energy currency of ATP. Carbohydrates are made of monosaccharides. You can probably think about lots of examples of your more simple carbohydrates made out of the monomers or disaccharides like glucose and fructose. But you also have more complex carbohydrates, which are your larger polymers. So we are going to use carbohydrates for a primary energy source, but carbohydrates are also used for structural support. So if I think of a plant cell wall, it is going to be made of polymers. Primarily, it's going to be made of those cellulose polymers that are going to help to provide stability to maintain structure. Lipids are made of two different monomers. Primarily, you have glycerol and then fatty acids. You can see the fatty acid chains are just primarily hydrogen and carbon. So if you see a compound with very little oxygen and does not maintain that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio like carbohydrates, then you might think lipids. Examples of lipids, you have your phospholipids for your cell membrane, steroids for chemical messengers, like testosterone and estrogen, and waxes, which are part of those waterproof coverings, just like these phospholipids for your cells. But they also have a function of stored energy. So this is a triglyceride, and this is commonly known as fat. So it's how living things can store extra energy. One last thing, if I look at a fatty acid chain, if I only see single bonds between these carbon atoms, then I could say that this is a saturated fatty acid. But if I see a double bond between the carbon atoms, I could say that this is an unsaturated fatty acid because it still potentially could hold 2 more hydrogens or become more saturated with hydrogen. And for proteins, proteins are made of the amino acids. So all amino acids have a carboxyl group, a hydrogen, and amino group attached to a central carbon. But all amino acids, all 20, are going to differ in this R group. And because it has different R groups, that gives proteins different structures. And because proteins have different structures, they can have different functions. They can help with channels for transport of substances. They can help build cell structures as well as physical structures like your hair and nails and muscles. They can catalyze reactions with enzymes, and they can help with protection by forming antibodies against pathogens and foreign invaders. So speaking of proteins and enzymes, how do enzymes regulate biochemical reactions within a cell? First off, some background on enzymes. Enzymes are biological catalysts, and a catalyst are anything that will speed up a chemical reaction. So here you have your Pac-Man enzyme, and then you have the reactant, which is the substrate. The substrate C can perfectly fit into this area here, known as the active site. And because of this enzyme substrate complex, it can allow for the chemical reaction to happen faster. So how does it do that? Well, enzymes are going to speed up chemical reactions because they lower the activation energy. So if you look on this graph, if I start with my reactants, which with using an enzyme would be your substrate, and end with your products, notice without an enzyme, you have to put in more activation energy in order to get the same products. But with an enzyme, it's going to hold the substrate in such a way that it's going to lower the amount of energy that you need for this chemical reaction to take place. I like to compare enzymes to coupons. If you use a coupon, you can't use it to get money, so enzymes do not give you energy, but a coupon will just lower the amount of money you need to pay. Just like an enzyme lowers the amount of activation energy you need to start a reaction. Enzymes are reusable, but environmental factors can denature an enzyme. And two primary environmental factors are changes in temperature and pH that will denature an enzyme. So what does denature mean? It simply means that it's going to have a shape change. So if you heat an enzyme up, doesn't have to be boiling, could just be out of the optimal range. It's going to change the shape of the protein and therefore it will not be able to catalyze the reaction. Or if you change the pH out of its optimal pH, it has a shape change for the enzyme and again, will not allow for the enzyme to catalyze the reaction. I hope this helps. Have a great day.